You think people care about your problems, but they don't. And once you accept this brutal truth, your entire life will change. Here's why the Stoics were right about this. Look, this is going to sound harsh, but someone needs to tell you. Nobody cares about your problems as much as you do. Not your friends, not your family, not strangers on the internet. They might pretend to care for a few minutes. They might give you some sympathy, but then they go right back to their own lives and their own problems. And you're still sitting there expecting the world to stop and help you. The Stoics understood this reality 2,000 years ago, and it completely changed how they approached life. Before we get into this, if you've ever felt like nobody understands what you're going through, or if you've been disappointed by how little people seem to care about your struggles, leave a comment. Hit that like button if this is already hitting different, and subscribe because we're about to get real. So why doesn't anyone care about your problems? It's simple. Everyone is dealing with their own stuff. Your friend who you think should be more supportive, they're stressed about paying their bills. Your family member who doesn't seem to get it, they're handling their own crisis. That co-worker you vented to, they forgot about your problem 30 seconds after you stopped talking because they're worried about their own job security. This isn't because people are evil or selfish. It's because that's how human nature works. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, wrote in his journal that people are too busy with their own affairs to care much about yours. And if the emperor of the most powerful civilization on earth understood that nobody really cared about his problems, what makes you think your situation is different? But here's where most people mess up. They know logically that people are busy with their own lives, but emotionally they still expect others to care. They get upset when friends don't check in. They feel betrayed when family doesn't show up the way they wanted. They're disappointed when the world doesn't acknowledge their suffering. And this expectation, this need for others to care, is what's actually making everything worse. Let's talk about what happens when you live like people should care about your problems. You become dependent on external validation just to function. Something bad happens and you need to tell everyone about it. You need them to say the right things, react the right way, give you the attention you're craving, and when they don't or when they do but it's not enough, you feel even worse than before. The Stoics would say you're giving away your power. Epictetus taught that you should never place your happiness in things outside your control. And other people's reactions are definitely outside your control. You can't force someone to care. You can't make them understand. You can't control how much time and energy they give to your situation. So when you need these things to feel okay, you're setting yourself up for constant disappointment. Here's a real example. You lose your job. It's devastating. You tell your friends and family. They say they're sorry, they offer some generic advice, maybe they listen for a bit. But after a few days, they stop asking about it. They move on. Meanwhile, you're still unemployed, still stressed, still struggling. And now on top of the original problem, you're also hurt that people don't seem to care anymore. You feel alone, you feel forgotten. But here's the truth. They have their own jobs to worry about, their own bills to pay, their own problems consuming their thoughts. Or maybe you're going through a breakup. You want everyone to understand how much you're hurting. You post about it, you talk about it, you need people to validate that your ex was terrible and you were the victim. But people get tired of hearing about it. They have their own relationship issues. They've got their own heartbreaks they're dealing with or have dealt with. Your pain, as real as it is to you, is just not that interesting or important to them. And the more you expect them to care, the more isolated you'll feel when they inevitably move on while you're still stuck. Seneca wrote something powerful about this. He said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Part of that suffering comes from imagining that we're alone because nobody cares, when really everyone is alone in their struggles because that's just how life works. The Stoics didn't see this as depressing. They saw it as liberating. Because here's what happens when you truly accept that nobody cares about your problems as much as you do. You stop waiting for rescue. You stop wasting energy being upset that people aren't showing up the way you want. You stop posting your problems online, hoping for sympathy. You stop having those long complaining sessions that don't actually solve anything. Instead, you focus all that energy on solving the problem yourself. Think about it. How much time have you spent talking about your problems versus actually doing something about them? How many hours have you wasted being hurt that someone didn't care enough, when you could have used those hours to improve your situation? The Stoics were obsessed with action over emotion. They knew that the only person guaranteed to care about your problems enough to fix them is you. Marcus Aurelius faced massive problems, wars, plagues, betrayals, the constant pressure of running an empire. And you know what he didn't do? He didn't go around expecting everyone to understand how hard his life was. He didn't need validation from others to keep going. He wrote in his journal, not to publish or to get sympathy, but to remind himself of Stoic principles that would help him handle his responsibilities. He understood that his problems were his to solve, and nobody else was coming to save him. Now let's address the other side of this. When you accept that nobody cares about your problems, you also realize something else. You don't actually need them to care. You're stronger than you think. You've solved problems before. You've gotten through hard times before. You have the capacity to handle this too. The need for others to care is often just a way to avoid taking responsibility for fixing things yourself. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes you don't actually want solutions. You want attention. You want sympathy. You want to feel special because you're suffering. And when you keep talking about your problems but never doing anything about them, that's exactly what's happening. You're using your problems as a way to get emotional support from others because you're not giving it to yourself. The Stoics would call this weakness, not the having problems part. Everyone has problems. The weakness is in needing others to constantly acknowledge your suffering instead of just dealing with it. Epictetus was a slave with a permanent injury. He had real problems, but he didn't spend his time trying to get people to feel sorry for him. He spent his time developing his mind and his philosophy. He turned his limitations into wisdom that still helps people thousands of years later. Let's talk about social media for a second. You post about your problem. Maybe it's vague, like worst day ever, or maybe it's detailed. People comment with heart emojis and sending love and here if you need to talk. And for a moment you feel better. You feel seen. You feel cared for. But then what? The problem is still there. Those comments didn't actually help, and tomorrow when you're still struggling, those same people will be scrolling past your content to look at something else, because they have their own lives to live. This is the illusion of connection. You think sharing your problems creates closeness with others, but really, it just creates a temporary feeling of validation that disappears almost immediately. The Stoics understood that real strength comes from self-reliance, not from broadcasting your struggles hoping someone will care enough to fix them for you. Here's another hard truth. The more you complain about your problems, the more people avoid you. Nobody wants to be around someone who's constantly in crisis mode, constantly needing support, constantly draining their energy. You might think you're being vulnerable and authentic, but what you're actually doing is pushing people away. Because caring about someone else's problems is exhausting, especially when that person isn't doing anything to help themselves. The Stoics had a concept called circles of concern. Things close to you that you can control are your responsibility to handle. Things further away that you can't control aren't worth your energy. Your problems fall into your circle. They're yours to solve. Other people's problems fall into their circles. You can offer help if you choose to, but you're not obligated to carry their burdens, and they're not obligated to carry yours. So here's the shift that changes everything. Instead of being hurt that nobody cares about your problems, be grateful that you're capable of handling them yourself. Instead of waiting for someone to save you, become your own hero. Instead of needing external validation to feel okay, develop internal strength that doesn't depend on anyone else. Marcus Aurelius wrote that very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Your problems exist. That's reality. But your suffering about those problems, your anger that people don't care enough, your disappointment in how others respond, that's all optional. That's all coming from your expectations about how the world should work, rather than accepting how it actually does work. When you truly internalize that nobody cares about your problems as much as you do, you stop wasting time on hurt feelings and start investing time in solutions. You become resourceful. You become resilient. You become the kind of person who faces difficulties without falling apart. And ironically, when you stop needing people to care about your problems, they actually respect you more. They see someone who's strong and capable instead of someone who's constantly struggling and needing rescue. The Stoics weren't telling you that nobody cares to be mean. They were telling you this to free you. When you understand that you're ultimately alone in your struggles, you stop outsourcing your emotional well-being to others. You stop being a victim, waiting for someone to acknowledge your pain. You take full responsibility for your life, your problems, and your solutions. This doesn't mean you can't have support systems. This doesn't mean you should never ask for help. It means you don't build your entire sense of stability on whether or not other people care about what you're going through. You handle your problems because they're yours to handle, not because someone is watching or caring or validating your struggle. Epictetus said that freedom is the only worthy goal in life. And you can't be free if you need others to care about your problems in order to feel okay. That's dependency. That's weakness. True freedom comes from knowing you can face whatever life throws at you with or without anyone else's support. That's the harsh truth of Stoicism. And once you really accept it, you become unshakable. Your problems are real. Your struggles matter, but they matter to you, and that's enough. You don't need the world to stop and acknowledge your pain. You need to acknowledge it yourself, feel it, and then do what needs to be done. That's what strong people do. That's what the Stoics did, and that's what you're capable of doing too.